I need to speak to the general. The voice was quiet, raspy with age, but held a strange sort of firmness like old, weathered oak. The young woman behind the polished marble desk didn't even look up from her monitor. Her nails, a perfect crimson, clicked rhythmically on the keyboard. She was the gatekeeper to the inner sanctum of the Pentagon's most powerful offices, a world of crisp uniforms, classified briefings, and palpable authority. The man standing before her was an anomaly, a glitch in the pristine code of her environment. He wore a simple, faded windbreaker, worn trousers, and scuffed shoes that spoke of miles walked on pavement, not plush carpets. His face was a roadmap of wrinkles, but his eyes, a pale, clear blue, were unsettlingly steady. "The general has a schedule," she said, her tone dripping with rehearsed, condescending patience. "It's planned to the minute, 6 months in advance. You can't just walk in here and speak to the general. Do you have an appointment?" "No, I don't," the old man, Samuel, replied simply. He didn't seem offended or flustered. He just stood there, his hands clasped loosely in front of him, a picture of calm persistence. "But he will see me if you would just tell him my name." The receptionist, whose nameplate read J. Sterling, finally graced him with her full attention. She leaned back in her ergonomic chair, taking in his appearance with a slow, appraising glance that was more of an insult than a look. "Your name?" she asked, a small, mocking smile playing on her lips. "Honey, the general meets with senators, foreign dignitaries, and captains of industry. I'm not sure your name is going to crack that list. What's the nature of your business?" "It's personal," Samuel said, his voice unwavering. Jessica Sterling let out a short, sharp laugh. "Personal? Oh, that's rich. Look, Grandpa, this isn't a social club. This is the nerve center of the United States military. If you don't have official business, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." She gestured vaguely toward the imposing glass doors through which he had entered. In the corner of the vast, silent lobby, a young Army lieutenant, his uniform impeccable, looked up from his tablet. A flicker of curiosity crossing his face, he watched the exchange, feeling a prickle of discomfort at the receptionist's tone. Samuel didn't move. He seemed rooted to the spot, his gaze fixed on the mahogany door behind Jessica's desk. "It's been a long time. He'll want to know I'm here. Please just give him my name, Samuel Finch." "Samuel Finch," Jessica repeated, tapping the name into her keyboard with exaggerated slowness, as if dealing with a child. The system returned nothing. "Nope, no appointments, no flags, no reason for you to be here. Now, I've been patient, but you're creating a distraction. I'm going to have to call security." "That won't be necessary," Samuel said. The quiet certainty in his voice was beginning to fray the edges of Jessica's composure. It was unnatural. An old man in a worn jacket shouldn't be this unflappable in the face of her authority. He should be shuffling his feet, apologizing, backing away, but he just stood there, his clear eyes holding a weight she couldn't comprehend. "Oh, I think it is," she snapped, her professional veneer cracking. She reached for the intercom button connected to the security desk. "This is your last chance. Leave now." The pressure of her finger on the button triggered something in Samuel's mind. It wasn't the button itself, but the faint, almost inaudible click it made. It was the same sound as the detonator switch on a Claymore mine. Suddenly, he wasn't in a sterile, air-conditioned lobby anymore. The scent of polish and antiseptic was replaced by the thick, metallic smell of blood and cordite. He was 25 years old again, crouched in a muddy foxhole carved into the red earth of a nameless hill in a country no one back home could find on a map. Rain, thick and warm, plastered his hair to his forehead. Next to him, a young lieutenant, barely old enough to shave, was trying to work a jammed radio, his hand shaking. His name was David Davies. "They're coming, Sam!" Davies had yelled over the deafening roar of artillery. "The whole damn battalion is coming over that ridge!" Samuel hadn't looked at the ridge. He was looking at the intricate web of wires he'd spent the last 12 hours laying in the dark, a deadly garden planted in the mud. His hands, now gnarled with age, were then steady and sure, connecting the final charge. He was a ghost, a specialist in a unit that didn't officially exist. His job was to be the last line of defense, the unseen force that turned the tide when all else failed. "Let them come," he'd said, his voice as calm then as it was now. He held the detonator, his thumb resting on the switch. Just a little closer. He remembered the look in Lieutenant Davies's eyes, a mix of terror and awe. Davies had been given an impossible order: hold Firebase Crimson at all costs. It was a strategic linchpin, and if it fell, the entire flank would collapse. Reinforcements were hours away. They had only 30 men left against hundreds. Davies was ready to die. But Samuel wasn't. "Sir," Samuel had said, his eyes never leaving the approaching tree line, "you get our boys to the fallback point. I'll handle the welcome party. That's an order from a higher authority than yours." He didn't mean a general. He meant the unwritten law of his unit. They did what others couldn't. "I'm not leaving you, Finch," Davies had shouted. "You are," Samuel said, his voice flat. "Because if you don't, your men die for nothing. Go. And if I don't see you again, you tell them we held the line." He had pressed a small, worn leather pouch into Davies's hand. "Give this to my mother. You make it back. You hear me? You make it back." "Finch!" Jessica's sharp voice snapped him back to the present. "Are you deaf? I said I'm calling. Security!" Samuel blinked, the ghosts of Firebase Crimson receding, leaving only the sterile marble and the angry young woman. He looked at her, and for the first time, a flicker of something other than patience crossed his face. It was a profound weariness. He had survived that night. He had held the line. He had walked out of a hell that had consumed an entire enemy battalion, carrying wounds both seen and unseen. He had done it so that young people like Jessica could live in a world where they could be safe, arrogant, and dismissive in a quiet lobby. "Fine," he said, his voice a low whisper. Tell General Davies that the ghost of Firebase Crimson is here. Tell him I've come to return something of his." Jessica stared at him. "The ghost of Firebase Crimson. Is that supposed to be some kind of joke? A password from a spy movie?" She scoffed, her disdain reaching its peak. This was it. The old man was clearly delusional. She would put an end to this circus. To humor him, and to have the final, satisfying proof to give the security guards when they arrived, she turned back to her terminal. With a flourish of derision, she typed the strange phrase into a high-level keyword search field reserved for sensitive communiques. "Ghost of Firebase Crimson." She expected the screen to return, "No results found." She expected to turn back to him with a triumphant, final smirk. What happened instead made her blood run cold. The entire screen flashed a deep, urgent red. A single, block-lettered directive appeared, overriding all other programs. Classification: Omega Gamma, utmost priority. Identity confirmed: S. Finch. Do not delay, do not question. Escort immediately to General D. Davies. Secure all lobby communications. Stand by. Jessica's breath hitched in her throat. Her face, moments before flushed with irritation, went chalk white. The smug smile evaporated, replaced by a mask of pure, unadulterated shock. Her hands, which had been so steady and confident on the keyboard, began to tremble. Omega Gamma, she didn't even know what that was, but she knew Omega was the highest possible security classification, reserved for operations and individuals so secret they were practically myths. It was a level so far above her clearance that seeing it on her screen felt like a violation, like she'd accidentally peered into the mind of God. Her eyes darted from the terrifying red screen back to the old man. He hadn't changed. He was still just standing there, a frail figure in a faded jacket. But now she saw him differently. The quiet patience wasn't senility. It was control. The steady eyes weren't vacant. They were watching, weighing, remembering. The worn clothes weren't a sign of poverty. They were camouflage. He was a lion disguised as a lamb. Before she could process the command on her screen, before she could even form a word, the imposing mahogany door behind her burst open with such force that it slammed against the interior wall. Four-star General David Davies, a man whose presence usually filled any room with an aura of immense power and unassailable command, stood framed in the doorway. His face was thunderous, his eyes blazing with a fury she had only ever seen in news reports about escalating global conflicts. He had clearly been alerted by the system flag. "Sterling! What in God's name is going on out here?" he boomed, his voice echoing in the cavernous lobby. "I received an Omega alert. Who—" His tirade cut off abruptly. His eyes scanned the lobby and landed on Samuel Finch. The transformation was instantaneous and absolute. The fury vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief, then dawning recognition, and finally an emotion so profound it seemed to shake the very foundations of the decorated general. His formidable posture softened. The hard lines of his face seemed to melt away, revealing the young, terrified lieutenant from that muddy foxhole half a century ago. "Sam," he whispered, the name a fragile thing in the heavy silence. "My God. Sam, is it really you?" Ignoring his stunned receptionist, ignoring the now standing Lieutenant Evans who had snapped to rigid attention, General Davies strode across the marble floor. He didn't walk. He almost ran. He stopped directly in front of Samuel, his eyes scanning the old man's face as if trying to reconcile the hero of his memories with the frail man before him. Then, in an act that sent a wave of shock through the entire lobby, General David Davies, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, straightened his back, brought his hand to his brow in a salute so sharp it could have cut glass, and held it. He wasn't saluting a civilian. He was saluting a superior. The silence was deafening. Jessica felt like she was going to faint. The world had just turned upside down. Samuel slowly raised a hand, not to return the salute, but to gently touch the general's arm. "It's been a long time, David," he said, his voice soft. The general lowered his hand, but his eyes never left Samuel's face. They were glistening with unshed tears. "They told me you were gone, Sam. KIA, your name is on a wall, a black granite wall." "The report was filed that way to protect the nature of the operation," Samuel said calmly. "It was better for the ghost to remain a ghost." Davies finally seemed to notice the frozen tableau around them. He turned his gaze to Jessica, and the warmth in his eyes instantly turned to Arctic ice. His voice, when he spoke, was low, controlled, and more terrifying than his earlier shouting. "Miss Sterling," he began, his words precise and deadly. "Tell me exactly what happened here." Jessica swallowed hard, her throat suddenly dry as dust. "Sir, he didn't have an appointment. He asked to see you, and I followed protocol." "Protocol?" The general took a step toward her desk, his shadow falling over her. "Protocol is for bureaucrats. Honor is for soldiers. Let me tell you who you were applying your protocol to." He gestured back at Samuel. In the autumn of 1971, a vital strategic outpost, Firebase Crimson, was about to be overrun. An entire flank of our army was about to collapse, a collapse that would have cost thousands of American lives. I was a young lieutenant in command, and I was about to watch all my men die. He paused, his voice thick with emotion. The entire lobby was listening, rapt. Then, Sergeant Samuel Finch, attached to a unit that you will never read about in any history book, made a decision. He sent me and the surviving members of my platoon to safety and stayed behind, alone. He stayed behind and held off an entire enemy battalion for 6 hours with nothing but a few claymores and a rifle. He saved us all. When the reinforcements finally arrived, they found nothing, just silence. The enemy was gone, annihilated, and so was Sergeant Finch. He was declared killed in action, a hero whose real story could never be told. He turned back to Samuel. "We thought you were a ghost for 50 years, Sam. A legend we told to young soldiers to teach them what courage looked like." He then fixed his icy glare back on Jessica. "This man is not a grandpa who wandered in off the street. He is a living monument. He is the reason men like me get to wear these stars on our shoulders. He is owed more respect and honor than anyone who will ever walk through that door, myself included. Do you understand me?" Jessica could only nod, tears of shame and humiliation streaming down her face. "Sir, I'm so sorry," she stammered, looking at Samuel. "I had no idea. I'm so sorry." The apology was directed at the general, but it was Samuel who responded. He walked slowly toward the desk, his old shoes making soft sounds on the marble. He looked down at the young woman, and there was no anger in his eyes, only a gentle, profound sadness. "It's all right," he said, and his voice was so kind it was like a physical blow to Jessica. "You were doing your job. Respect isn't something you can see. It's not in the uniform or the title, it's in the heart. Sometimes the most important uniforms are the ones nobody ever sees." He placed a hand on the general's shoulder. "She's a good soldier, David. She was just guarding her post." This act of grace, of forgiveness in the face of such deep disrespect, was the final, devastating blow to Jessica's arrogance. It was one thing to be reprimanded by a general. It was another to be forgiven by the hero she had just humiliated. The lesson seared itself into her soul. True strength wasn't about power or position, it was about this. It was about grace under pressure, about kindness in the face of ignorance. General Davies looked from Samuel's compassionate face to Jessica's tear-streaked one, and his own expression softened slightly. "Come on, Sam," he said, his voice thick again. "Let's get you inside. We have 50 years to catch up on." He put a hand on Samuel's back and personally escorted him toward the mahogany door. As they passed, Lieutenant Evans, who had witnessed the entire event, stood even straighter, his eyes fixed on Samuel's back with an expression of pure reverence. He had just received a lesson more valuable than anything he'd learned at West Point. He had seen a ghost walk, and he'd learned that the quietest, most unassuming people can carry the greatest weight of heroism. Inside the general's opulent office, filled with flags, awards, and photos of powerful people, the two old soldiers stood facing each other. The vast difference in their current stations in life evaporated, leaving only the memory of the mud and the rain. "You said you had something of mine to return," Davies said, his voice now gentle. Samuel reached into the pocket of his worn windbreaker. He pulled out a small object, wrapped in oilcloth that was cracked with age. He carefully unwrapped it and held it out. It was a tarnished silver Zippo lighter engraved with the initials DD. "You dropped this when you were getting on the radio," Samuel said. "I picked it up. Figured you might want it back." Davies took the lighter, his hand trembling slightly. He stared at it, a relic from a life he thought long gone. "I carried this through my whole tour," he whispered. "My father gave it to me." He looked up, his eyes meeting Samuel's. "You held on to this all this time?" "I made a promise to return it," Samuel said with a small smile. "I'm just a little late on the delivery." The two men stood in silence for a long moment. the 50 years between them collapsing into a single shared memory. Outside in the lobby, Jessica Sterling sat at her desk, not working. She was staring at the empty space where the old man had stood. Her world had been rebuilt on a new foundation. She would never again judge a person by their clothes, their age, or their lack of an appointment. She now knew that heroes didn't always wear uniforms. Sometimes they wore faded windbreakers and carried the ghosts of their courage in a quiet, unshakable gaze. She had been guarding a door, but she had failed to recognize the man who had guarded an entire generation. It was a lesson she would carry with her for the rest of her life, a quiet tribute to the ghost who had walked into her lobby and reminded her what true honor looked like. The stories we see in movies are often pale imitations of the real valor that walks quietly among us every single day. These heroes don't ask for parades or recognition. Their reward was the safety of the nation they served. They are the quiet janitors, the patient grandfathers, the unassuming neighbors whose stories are etched not in stone but in the freedoms we so often take for granted. The next time you see an old veteran, look past the wrinkles and the simple clothes. Look into their eyes. You might just see the steady gaze of a hero looking back. If this story reminded you of the quiet strength that surrounds us, please like and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Subscribe for more stories that honor the unsung heroes who walk among us.